The night of May 30th, 1943, above the Ruhr Valley, Oberleutnant Hans Joachim Jabs throttled back his Messerschmitt Bf 110 G4 night fighter as he scanned the darkness for the British bomber stream he knew was approaching. The Liechtenstein BC radar set mounted in his aircraft's nose provided crude returns, glowing blips on a cathode ray tube that represented potential targets somewhere in the black void ahead. His radio operator, Feldwebel Paul Rosenberger, hunched over the equipment in the cramped fuselage behind him, calling out ranges and bearings as they stalked their prey. Jabs was one of the Nachtjagd's most experienced pilots, with 14 confirmed night victories against RAF bombers. He understood the rhythm of these engagements, the patient stalking through darkness, the careful approach from below and behind where the bombers' guns could not reach, the sudden burst of cannon fire that sent another Lancaster or Halifax tumbling from the sky in flames. Tonight would be different. Tonight, Jabs would encounter something that defied everything the Luftwaffe believed about British bombers and their defensive capabilities. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. At 23,000 feet, far above the normal altitude where German night fighters operated, a de Havilland Mosquito NF, Mark II of 604 Squadron, pressed through the darkness at 415 miles per hour. Squadron Leader John Cunningham, already an ace with 15 victories, sat in the left seat while his radar operator, Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Rawnsley, monitored the AI Mark IV radar system that transformed the Mosquito from a fast bomber into a lethal hunter. What the Germans did not yet comprehend was that the aircraft they had dismissed as a nuisance raider had been transformed into a weapon specifically designed to destroy their most effective defensive system, the Nachtjagd itself. The Mosquito that Cunningham flew that night represented a technological and doctrinal revolution that the Luftwaffe had failed to anticipate. Built almost entirely of wood at a time when modern combat aircraft were constructed from aluminum, powered by two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines that generated 2,300 combined horsepower, the Mosquito possessed a speed advantage over German night fighters that fundamentally altered the mathematics of interception. A Bf 110, the Nachtjagd's primary night fighter, could reach perhaps 340 miles per hour under optimal conditions. The Mosquito was 75 miles per hour faster. That difference was not incremental, it was decisive. The story of how this advantage came to exist begins not with military planning, but with the vision of Geoffrey de Havilland, an aircraft designer who believed that speed and altitude could provide better protection than armor and defensive guns. In 1938, as war approached, de Havilland proposed to the Air Ministry a bomber so fast that no fighter could catch it, so light that it needed no defensive armament, constructed primarily of wood to conserve strategic materials like aluminum. The proposal was revolutionary. It was also met with profound skepticism. Air Ministry planners in 1939 believed that bombers required heavy defensive armament, armor protection, and substantial bomb loads. The de Havilland concept seemed to violate every lesson learned from early air combat. A wooden aircraft appeared fragile and outdated. An unarmed bomber seemed suicidal. The promised speed of 400 miles per hour seemed optimistic at best, impossible at worst. Yet de Havilland persisted, arguing that his company could build such an aircraft quickly, cheaply, and in quantities that would not strain Britain's limited aluminum supplies. The prototype, Mosquito, designated W4050, first flew on November 25, 1940. Test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the designer's son, reported that the aircraft handled beautifully and possessed performance that exceeded even the optimistic predictions. The Mosquito reached 388 miles per hour in level flight, faster than any operational fighter in the RAF at that time. Climb rate exceeded 2,000 feet per minute. Service ceiling approached 34,000 feet. These were not the characteristics of a bomber. These were the characteristics of a fighter that happened to be large enough to carry bombs. The Air Ministry's initial skepticism began to erode as test flights confirmed the Mosquito's exceptional performance. By early 1941, orders were placed for bomber, reconnaissance, and fighter variants. The fighter version, designated the NF Mark II, retained the bomber's speed but added four 20mm Hispano cannons in the belly and 4.303 Browning machine guns in the nose. More significantly, it incorporated the latest airborne interception radar, the AI Mark IV, which could detect aircraft at ranges up to 3 miles under optimal conditions. The Merlin engine that powered this transformation was itself a technological marvel that deserves examination. Designed by Rolls-Royce in the 1930s, the Merlin was a liquid-cooled V12 engine that combined advanced metallurgy, precision manufacturing, and sophisticated supercharging to produce reliable power at high altitudes. The Merlin 61 variant, used in later Mosquito night fighters, generated 1,565 horsepower at 11,000 feet, sustained by a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that maintained power output as air density decreased with altitude. German engine designers had pursued different paths, favouring air-cooled radial engines for many applications and generally achieving lower power-to-weight ratios than British liquid-cooled designs. The Daimler-Benz DB601 engine that powered the Bf 110 produced barely 1,100 horsepower, a deficit of nearly 500 horsepower per engine compared to the Mosquito's power plants. This power disadvantage translated directly into speed limitations that German night fighter crews would discover were insurmountable. Understanding the tactical situation in 1943 requires grasping the nature of the strategic bombing campaign against Germany. RAF Bomber Command conducted night raids against German industrial targets, accepting the reduced accuracy of night bombing in exchange for lower loss rates compared to daylight operations. German defences had evolved to counter this threat through a system called Himmelbett, or four-poster bed, which divided German airspace into boxes, each monitored by ground radar and patrolled by a single night fighter under close ground control. The system worked effectively against the relatively slow and poorly defended British bombers of 1940 and 1941. A Wellington bomber cruised at perhaps 180 miles per hour. A Halifax managed 280. Even the new Lancaster, entering service in 1942, could reach only 287 miles per hour. German night fighters had ample speed margin to intercept, stalk, and destroy these aircraft. Losses mounted steadily through 1941 and 1942 as the Nachtjagd refined their tactics and equipment. British planners recognized that German night fighters posed the primary threat to their bomber offensive. If the Nachtjagd could be disrupted, confused, or destroyed, bomber losses would decrease and the campaign could intensify. Various solutions were attempted. Electronic countermeasures called window, strips of aluminum foil dropped to blind German radar, route planning that avoided known fighter concentrations. Fighter escorts that could protect bombers during portions of their missions. Each approach had limitations. What was needed was an aircraft that could hunt the hunters, an intruder that could penetrate German airspace and destroy night fighters before they could engage the bomber stream. The Mosquito night fighter provided exactly this capability. Its speed meant it could reach German airfields quickly, loiter for extended periods, and escape if pursued. Its range, over 1,500 miles with external fuel tanks, allowed deep penetration into Germany. Its radar meant it could find targets in total darkness. Its firepower, 4 20mm cannons, could destroy any German aircraft with a single burst. Most importantly, its performance meant that German night fighters could not catch it if the Mosquito pilot chose not to engage. The first operational Mosquito night fighter unit, 657 Squadron, began flying defensive patrols over Britain in December 1941. Results were immediate and dramatic. The Mosquito's speed allowed it to catch German raiders that had previously escaped British defences. On the night of December 20th, 1941, Wing Commander John Cunningham, flying a Mosquito NF Mark II, intercepted and destroyed a Junkers Ju-88 bomber over Norfolk. The German crew never knew what hit them. One moment they were flying their bombing mission. The next moment, cannon shells were tearing through their aircraft. German intelligence officers analysing wreckage from aircraft shot down over Britain noted something peculiar about the damage patterns. The cannon shells came from British 20mm weapons, but the attacks occurred at altitudes and speeds that should have been impossible for existing British night fighters. Bristol Beaufighters, The RAF's primary night fighter through early 1942 could barely reach 300 miles per hour. How were British fighters intercepting German raiders flying at 350 miles per hour at 25,000 feet? The answer became clear in March 1942 when a Mosquito made a forced landing in France due to fuel exhaustion. German technical intelligence examined the aircraft with intense interest. The wooden construction surprised them. The sleek, streamlined design impressed them. The performance estimates they derived from the wreckage alarmed them. If British calculations were correct, and German engineers had no reason to doubt them, this wooden aircraft was faster than anything in the Luftwaffe inventory except experimental jet aircraft that were years from operational service. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring reportedly refused to believe initial reports about the Mosquito's capabilities, insisting that a wooden bomber could not possibly outperform German fighters built from strategic materials using modern construction techniques. This denial extended through much of 1942, during which time the RAF expanded Mosquito production and began training additional squadrons in night fighting techniques. By late 1942, the Air Ministry decided to employ Mosquitoes offensively, sending them into German airspace to hunt the Nachtjagd over their own bases. The tactical concept was straightforward but dangerous. Mosquito crews would patrol German night fighter bases during periods when British bomber streams were active. Using their radar, they would locate German fighters taking off, landing, or circling in their patrol boxes. The Mosquitoes would then engage these aircraft, either destroying them or forcing them to take evasive action that disrupted their interceptions of British bombers. The tactic required exceptional skill, iron nerves, and absolute faith in the Mosquito's speed advantage. Squadron Leader John Cunningham pioneered these intruder tactics, flying deep into Germany to patrol known night fighter bases. His 20 victories by mid-1943 made him one of the RAF's highest-scoring night fighter aces, and nearly all his kills came in Mosquitos. Cunningham understood that the aircraft's speed was its ultimate defense. If he encountered superior numbers or found himself in a disadvantageous position, he could simply push the throttles forward and disappear into the darkness at 400 miles per hour. No German fighter could follow. The psychological impact on German night fighter crews was profound. They had operated for 2 years with the confidence that came from technical superiority and tactical dominance. They could catch any British bomber. They could escape any British fighter. Now, suddenly, they were being hunted by an aircraft they could neither catch nor escape. Some German pilots reported encounters with British fighters that appeared, fired a devastating burst, and vanished before any response was possible. Others described pursuing what they believed was a bomber, only to watch it accelerate away at speeds their fighters could not match. Oberst Werner Streib, one of the Nachtjagd's most successful commanders with 66 night victories, later wrote about the frustration of encountering Mosquitoes during 1943. His Bf-110 was an excellent night fighter against bombers, but completely outclassed when facing an aircraft with 70 miles per hour speed advantage. Streib described ordering his pilot to pursue a contact, watching it pull away effortlessly, then realizing they were wasting fuel chasing an aircraft they could never catch. The tactical calculus had shifted fundamentally. German attempts to counter the Mosquito threat reveal the depth of the problem they faced. One approach involved positioning fighters at higher altitudes where they might have diving speed advantage. This tactic failed because Mosquitoes routinely operated at 25,000 feet or higher, altitudes where German fighters struggled due to inadequate supercharging. Another approach attempted to use faster German aircraft, but the Focke-Wulf Fa-190 fighter bomber could barely reach 380 miles per hour, still slower than the Mosquito. The Messerschmitt Me-210, a more advanced night fighter entering service in late 1943, could reach 360 miles per hour, an improvement but still inadequate. The material specifications of the Mosquito merit detailed examination because they reveal how British engineering achieved performance that German design philosophy could not match. The airframe used a sandwich construction of balsa wood between layers of birch plywood, creating structure that was light, strong, and easily repaired. This technique, pioneered by de Havilland, allowed the company to build aircraft in furniture factories using woodworkers rather than specialized metalworkers, dramatically expanding production capacity. By 1943, multiple factories were producing Mosquitos at rates that exceeded German night fighter production. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Merlin engine's technical superiority derived from multiple engineering advances. The two-stage supercharger, introduced in the Merlin 60 series, compressed incoming air twice before it entered the engine's cylinders. This maintained manifold pressure at high altitudes where air density would normally cause power loss. German engines typically used single-stage superchargers, accepting performance degradation above 15,000 feet. This difference meant that Mosquitos could operate effectively at altitudes where German fighters struggled, adding another dimension to their tactical advantage. Fuel quality also played a crucial role, though less dramatically than in fighter versus fighter combat. British 100-octane aviation gasoline allowed Merlin engines to run higher boost pressures without detonation, extracting maximum power from each combustion cycle. German synthetic fuel, produced through the Bergius process from coal, typically rated at 87 to 91 octane on the lean mixture scale. This limited the boost pressures German engines could sustain, directly constraining their power output and thus aircraft performance. The combination of superior engine design, better fuel, and lighter airframe construction gave the Mosquito performance margins that compounded across multiple parameters. It was not merely faster in level flight, it climbed faster, reaching operational altitude more quickly. It turned more tightly at high speed due to better power-to-weight ratio. It accelerated more rapidly when the pilot advanced the throttles. Every aspect of flight performance favored the Mosquito, creating a situation where German night fighter crews faced an opponent that was superior in every measurable way. British tactics evolved to exploit these advantages systematically. Mosquito crews patrolling German airspace developed standard procedures for different situations. If they detected a German fighter climbing to intercept bombers, they would position themselves above and behind, using altitude advantage and speed to execute a classic bounce from superior position. If they found a fighter circling its patrol box, they would approach from below, using their radar to guide a careful stalk that ended with a firing pass from minimum range. If they encountered multiple fighters, they would engage the most vulnerable, then use their speed to escape before others could respond. The night of April 20th, 1943, demonstrated these tactics perfectly. Flight Lieutenant G.R.I. Parker and his navigator, Flying Officer G.D. Armitage, flying Mosquito DD 614 of 85 Squadron, patrolled the approach to Leeuwarden Airfield in occupied Holland. Using their AI Mark IV radar, they detected a Bf-110 taking off and climbing to operational altitude. Parker positioned his Mosquito 3,000 feet above the German fighter, stalked it patiently as it climbed, then dove to attack from directly astern. A 3-second burst from his 4 20mm cannons destroyed the Bf-110 completely. The German crew never transmitted a distress call. They simply disappeared from German ground control radar, another mysterious loss attributed to unknown causes. German operational records from 1943 show increasing losses classified as cause unknown or failed to return from patrol. Many of these losses were Mosquito victories, where the attack came so suddenly and with such devastating firepower that the German crew had no opportunity to report what was happening. A Bf-110 weighed 13,000 pounds empty and carried a crew of 4 20mm shells, each weighing 4 ounces and containing high explosive, could tear such an aircraft apart in seconds. Survivors from the few German crews who escaped Mosquito attacks described seeing tracers, then explosions, then nothing as their aircraft broke apart or caught fire. The Hispano cannon used by British fighters, including the Mosquito, fired at 650 rounds per minute per gun. 4 cannons meant 2,600 rounds per minute combined, though pilots typically fired in bursts of 1 to 3 seconds to conserve ammunition. A 1-second burst put 43 shells into the target area. At typical engagement ranges of 200 to 400 yards, this concentration of fire was absolutely lethal against any aircraft. German night fighters, optimized for attacking bombers, carried no armor protection against fighter attack. Their fuel tanks were not self-sealing against cannon fire. One good burst was usually sufficient. The introduction of improved radar variants further increased Mosquito effectiveness. The AI Mark 8, entering service in late 1943, provided better range discrimination and reduced minimum range, allowing crews to track targets closer before visual acquisition was necessary. This radar could detect targets at 5 miles under good conditions and maintain lockdown to 400 feet, giving Mosquito crews exceptional situational awareness. German Liechtenstein radar, by contrast, had a minimum range of approximately 600 yards, creating a blind zone where British bombers could hide. Mosquito crews exploited this by approaching to within the German radar's minimum range, where they were invisible to electronic detection. Wing Commander Brancer Burbridge would become the RAF's highest-scoring night fighter pilot, credited with 21 confirmed victories between late 1943 and mid-1944, all achieved in Mosquitos. Burbridge's tactics emphasized patience and precision. He would locate a target using radar, stalk it carefully until positive visual identification confirmed it was German, then close to optimum firing range before opening fire. His first burst was almost always fatal. Burbridge understood that the Mosquito's speed allowed him to choose his engagements carefully, taking time to set up perfect attacks rather than rushing shots. German responses grew increasingly desperate through 1943 and into 1944. One attempted solution involved converting day fighters for night operations, hoping their better performance might counter the Mosquito threat. The Focke-Wulf Fo 190A-8 was tested with flame dampers and rudimentary night fighting equipment, but its 380 mph top speed still left it slower than the Mosquito. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G variants faced similar limitations, lacking the endurance and radar equipment necessary for effective night fighting while offering no speed advantage. Major Wilhelm Herget, a Bf 110 pilot with 73 night victories, later described the Mosquito as the most dangerous opponent he faced during the entire war. Herget survived multiple encounters with Mosquitoes, usually by diving away at maximum speed and hoping the British pilot would not pursue. In one engagement over northern Germany in January 1944, Herget's rear gunner spotted tracers passing overhead and immediately called for evasive action. Herget threw his Bf 110 into a violent diving turn, jettisoned his external fuel tanks, and dove from 18,000 feet to 3,000 feet in a desperate escape attempt. The Mosquito followed effortlessly, closing to firing range twice before Herget managed to reach cloud cover and hide. His aircraft returned to base with 15 cannon shell holes in the wings and fuselage. Herget credited his survival to luck and the British pilot's apparent ammunition shortage. The industrial context reveals another layer of German disadvantage. Britain was producing approximately 250 Mosquitoes monthly by mid-1943, enough to replace losses and expand operational squadrons continuously. German night fighter production, constrained by strategic material shortages and competing demands from other aircraft programs, peaked at roughly 200 Bf 110s and Me 210s monthly combined. This production parity might seem adequate, except that German losses were increasing while British losses were decreasing, creating an unsustainable attrition spiral. Training disparities compounded the problem. British Mosquito crews typically received 150 to 200 hours of training on type before entering combat operations. This included extensive instrument flying, radar operation, night navigation, and air-to-air gunnery. German night fighter crews, facing chronic fuel shortages by late 1943, often received barely 75 hours of training, much of it conducted in obsolescent aircraft. When these inexperienced German crews encountered veteran British pilots flying superior aircraft, the outcome was predictable and usually fatal for the Germans. The psychological strain on German night fighter crews became evident in declining morale reports and increasing combat refusals. Some pilots developed mysterious mechanical problems that required them to abort missions before entering areas where Mosquitos operated. Others requested transfers to day fighter units, preferring the known dangers of daylight combat against American bombers to the terror of being hunted in darkness by an invisible enemy they could neither see nor outrun. Luftwaffe medical officers reported increasing cases of combat fatigue among night fighter crews, symptoms that included insomnia, anxiety attacks, and psychosomatic illness. General Major Joseph Schmid, commanding the Luftwaffe's 12th Fighter Corps responsible for night defense, wrote in his diary about the Mosquito problem. Schmid noted that British intruder operations had become so effective that German fighters were suffering approximately 30% losses during takeoff and landing phases, when they were most vulnerable and least able to maneuver. He requested additional anti-aircraft defences around night fighter bases, more searchlights to illuminate approaching British aircraft, and faster fighters that could intercept the Mosquitos. None of these requests could be fulfilled adequately. Germany's industrial capacity was stretched beyond limits, trying to replace losses on all fronts, while also developing new weapons systems. The D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, demonstrated how completely the Mosquito had achieved air supremacy in the night sky. German night fighters were almost completely absent during the critical hours when Allied airborne forces dropped behind enemy lines. The few German fighters that did attempt sorties encountered Mosquitos patrolling at high altitude and either turned back or were destroyed. Oberleutnant Kurt Welter, flying one of the new Me-262 jets on a night intruder mission, later reported that the greatest danger came not from Allied fighters over the beachhead, but from Mosquitos patrolling German airfields on his return flight. The technical evolution of the Mosquito continued through 1944, with improved variants entering service. The NF Mark 10XX, powered by Merlin 72 engines generating 1,710 horsepower each, could reach 424 miles per hour at 13,000 feet. This variant also carried the American AI Mark X radar, which provided even better performance than British sets. The combination made the Mosquito NF Mark 20X arguably the finest night fighter in the world by late 1944, superior to anything Germany, Japan, or even the United States could field. German attempts to develop counters included the Heinkel He 219, a fast bomber that might have been converted to night fighter duties, and various jet fighter projects that promised revolutionary performance. None reached operational service in time or numbers to affect the outcome. The Tele Messerschmitt Me-262, while impressively fast at 540 miles per hour, was unreliable, short-ranged, and available in tiny numbers. Most critically, its jet engines produced visible flames that made it easy to track at night, negating the invisibility that night fighters relied upon. The human cost of the Mosquito's dominance appears in German loss records. Between June 1943 and May 1945, German night fighter units suffered approximately 2,500 aircraft destroyed and over 4,000 aircrew killed. Not all these losses came from Mosquito attacks. Allied bombers and ground fire also took their toll, but Mosquito intruder operations accounted for a significant and disproportionate share. British estimates suggested that Mosquitos destroyed approximately 800 German aircraft in night fighting operations, with actual totals possibly higher due to unconfirmed kills, where German aircraft simply disappeared without witnesses. The maintenance burden of operating wooden aircraft in combat proved surprisingly manageable. Contrary to expectations that wooden structures would deteriorate rapidly in field conditions, Mosquitos proved remarkably durable. Battle damage that would have required major structural repairs on metal aircraft could often be fixed by squadron carpenters using standard woodworking tools. Bullet holes were plugged with wooden dowels and glued. Damaged sections could be cut out and replaced with plywood patches. This ease of repair kept operational rates high, with typical Mosquito squadrons maintaining 70 to 80% serviceability compared to 60 to 70% for metal aircraft. The de Havilland design philosophy that prioritized performance over protection proved correct in practice. Critics had argued that wooden aircraft would be vulnerable to fire, but combat experience showed that Mosquitoes were no more flammable than metal aircraft. The multiple fuel tanks, self-sealing, and positioned carefully within the structure, provided adequate protection. More importantly, the speed that made Mosquitos difficult to hit in the first place provided better protection than armor plate ever could. An aircraft that could not be caught could not be shot down. Squadron Leader Rupert Clark, a Mosquito pilot with 10 victories, later wrote about the psychological advantage that speed provided. Clark described knowing that he could always disengage from unfavorable situations, that no German fighter could force combat if he chose to decline. This confidence allowed Mosquito crews to be aggressive, to penetrate deep into German airspace, to loiter over enemy airfields waiting for targets. German night fighter crews, by contrast, operated with the constant awareness that British fighters might appear at any moment. Fighters they could not see on radar, could not catch if they fled, and could not escape if pursued. The broader strategic implications of Mosquito operations extended beyond simple kill ratios. Every German fighter destroyed on the ground or shot down during takeoff was one less fighter available to intercept the bomber stream. Every German crew forced to abort due to Mosquito presence was one less successful interception. Every minute German fighters spent looking for Mosquitos was 1 minute not spent hunting bombers. The cumulative effect reduced German night fighter effectiveness substantially, contributing to the dramatic decrease in bomber losses during the final year of the war. Air Marshal Arthur Harris, commanding RAF Bomber Command, recognized the Mosquito's value and consistently requested more of them. Harris wanted Mosquitos not just as night fighters but also as bombers, pathfinders, and reconnaissance aircraft. The type's versatility meant that a single basic airframe could perform multiple roles, simplifying logistics and training while maximizing production efficiency. By early 1945, Mosquitos comprised roughly 15% of Bomber Command's strength, but accounted for nearly 30% of successful target marking and a disproportionate share of German fighter kills. The final accounting shows production numbers that reveal Britain's industrial mobilization. Between 1940 and 1950, de Havilland and associated manufacturers produced 7,781 Mosquitos in all variants. Of these, approximately 900 were night fighters, though many bomber and fighter-bomber variants also engaged in air-to-air combat when opportunities arose. This production achievement, accomplished largely using non-strategic materials and labour not required for metal aircraft production, represented a triumph of innovative thinking over conventional wisdom. German technical intelligence eventually obtained relatively intact Mosquito airframes from crashes and forced landings. Detailed examination at Rechlin Test Center confirmed what German pilots had been reporting. The aircraft was genuinely faster than anything in Luftwaffe service except experimental jets. The wooden construction, initially dismissed as primitive, proved to be sophisticated and effective. The sandwich structure of balsa and birch created a strength-to-weight ratio that matched or exceeded aluminum construction while using materials Germany could not easily replicate due to shortages of suitable adhesives and tropical hardwoods. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commanding the Luftwaffe fighter forces, examined captured Mosquitos personally and reportedly expressed frustration that Germany had not pursued similar designs. Galland noted that the Mosquito represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking that German aircraft industry lacked, too focused on incremental improvements to existing designs rather than radical departures. He particularly admired the integration of high-powered engines with minimal airframe weight, achieving performance through engineering elegance rather than brute force. The radar integration in Mosquito night fighters represented another area where British engineering excelled. The AI Mark IV and later variants were designed specifically for the cramped confines of fighter aircraft, unlike German Liechtenstein sets, which were bulkier and more complex. British radar operators, called navigators in Mosquito crews, received extensive training in interpreting scope displays, tracking multiple contacts simultaneously, and guiding their pilots to optimal firing positions. This human-machine integration proved as important as raw technical specifications. Flight Lieutenant John Cunningham and his navigator flying officer Eric Barwell exemplified this teamwork during a patrol over Holland in September 1943. Barwell detected multiple contacts on his radar screen, separated them into individual tracks, identified the closest target as a fighter by its altitude and speed, and guided Quinton through a series of course corrections that positioned the Mosquito perfectly for attack. Quinton never saw the target visually until Barwell called visual range at 300 yards. A 2-second burst destroyed a Bf-110 so quickly that Quinton had to brake hard right to avoid the debris field. The entire engagement, from initial detection to kill, took less than 4 minutes. The German crew never knew they were being hunted. The operational tempo of Mosquito intruder missions increased through late 1943 and into 1944 as more squadrons converted to the type. On nights when Bomber Command dispatched 1,000 aircraft to German targets, multiple Mosquito squadrons would launch intruder patrols, creating a roving screen of fast, deadly interceptors that German night fighters had to navigate through to reach the bomber stream. Some Mosquitoes patrolled German fighter bases. Others flew barrier patrols along known German fighter routes. Still, others accompanied the bomber stream directly, ready to engage any German fighter that approached. The tactical flexibility this provided was unprecedented. German controllers, listening to the chaos on their radio networks, heard reports of British fighters everywhere simultaneously. Some reports were genuine Mosquito sightings. Others were nervous misidentifications or deliberate confusion sown by British electronic warfare aircraft. The cumulative effect created a fog of uncertainty that paralysed German response. Controllers hesitated to vector fighters to intercepts when those same fighters might be ambushed en route. Pilots hesitated to pursue bomber contacts when British fighters might be waiting in the darkness. Major Martin Drews, one of the few German night fighter pilots to survive the war with a high victory total, 52 confirmed kills, later described the period from mid-1943 onward as a nightmare of uncertainty. Drews explained that before the Mosquito intruder campaign, night fighting had been methodical and relatively safe. Controllers guided you to the bomber stream. You found a target on radar. You closed to firing range. You shot it down. After Mosquitoes appeared in force, every phase of the mission involved risk. Taking off was dangerous because Mosquitoes patrolled airfields. Flying to the bomber stream was dangerous because Mosquitoes flew barrier patrols. Engaging bombers was dangerous because Mosquitoes accompanied the stream. Landing was dangerous because Mosquitoes waited for fighters with depleted ammunition and fuel. Drees survived through exceptional situational awareness and a willingness to disengage immediately when threatened, but he watched dozens of skilled pilots die in circumstances where they never had a chance to fight back. The statistics reveal the transformation. In 1942, German night fighters destroyed approximately 700 British bombers, roughly 6% of sorties flown. In 1943, despite improvements in German equipment and tactics, kills dropped to approximately 600 bombers against increased British sorties, reducing loss rate to about 4%. By 1944, German kills fell below 400 bombers, while British sorties exceeded 200,000, pushing loss rates below 2%. Mosquito intruder operations contributed significantly to this decline by reducing German fighter effectiveness across all phases of operations. The technological race continued, even as German prospects deteriorated. The Mosquito NF Mark 11 entering service in mid-1944 incorporated the British AI Mark X radar derived from American SCR 720 technology. This centimetric radar could not be detected by German warning receivers, making Mosquitoes effectively invisible electronically as well as visually. German crews equipped with Flensburg homing devices that detected British Moniker tail warning radar suddenly found those devices useless because Mosquitoes did not carry Moniker. The electronic advantage shifted decisively to Britain. Oberstleutnant Victor von Lossberg, a Luftwaffe night fighter controller, later wrote about the despair that spread through German night fighter units during late 1944. Lossberg described watching experienced crews destroyed methodically, new crews killed on their first or second missions, and the growing realization that no tactical or technical solution existed within German capabilities. The Mosquito had created a problem that could not be solved without aircraft. Germany could not build in time and numbers that mattered. The human dimension of this defeat appears in letters and diaries from German aircrews. Feldwebel Hans Kraus, a radio operator in a Bf-110, wrote to his wife in October 1944, describing how his crew had survived 3 encounters with what they believed was a mosquito. Each time, they had escaped only by diving away at maximum speed, jettisoning equipment, and hiding in clouds or at extreme low altitude. Krause wrote that he and his pilot had discussed requesting transfer to day fighters, preferring the prospect of facing American Mustangs in daylight to the terror of being hunted by invisible British fighters at night. Krause was killed 3 weeks later when his aircraft was shot down during takeoff by a Mosquito of 605 Squadron. The material superiority that Britain enjoyed by 1944 extended beyond aircraft to every aspect of operations. British airfields in England operated with plentiful fuel, unlimited ammunition, and maintenance facilities that could handle routine repairs and major overhauls. German airfields, subjected to constant Allied bombing and hampered by fuel shortages, struggled to maintain operational readiness. Mosquito crews flew knowing that if they damaged their aircraft, excellent repair facilities waited at home. German crews flew knowing that battle damage might mean weeks or months before replacement aircraft arrived, if they arrived at all. The navigation systems available to British crews also provided advantages. The G radio navigation system, while jammed over Germany itself, provided accurate positioning over the North Sea and Western Europe, allowing Mosquito crews to fly precise courses to and from their patrol areas. The later H-2S ground mapping radar gave Mosquitoes the ability to navigate independently of ground-based aids, maintaining positional awareness even in total darkness and complete radio silence. German night fighters relied primarily on ground control for navigation, becoming ineffective when Allied jamming disrupted communications. Squadron leader William Maguire of 410 Squadron demonstrated the cumulative effect of these advantages during a patrol over Germany in March 1945. Using H-2S radar for navigation, Maguire flew his Mosquito to a precise position over Gütersloh airfield, where intelligence indicated night fighters were based. His navigator detected aircraft circling the field on AI radar. Maguire positioned above and behind one contact, close to 300 yards, and destroyed what proved to be a Bf-110. He then climbed back to altitude, relocated the circling pattern, selected another target, and destroyed a second Bf-110. The entire sequence took 18 minutes. German ground controllers, listening to their fighters' final transmissions, had no idea what was attacking their aircraft. Maguire returned to England, refueled, and flew a second mission the same night. The industrial capacity that supported such operations staggered German planners who examined captured British documents after the war. Britain was producing not merely adequate numbers of aircraft, but maintaining vast reserves of spare parts, replacement engines, and complete airframes. A squadron that lost 3 Mosquitoes in combat could expect replacements within days. Training units had sufficient aircraft to maintain instruction without robbing operational squadrons. This logistics system, often overlooked when discussing combat operations, proved as decisive as any technological advantage. The final phase of the Mosquito's night fighting career came during the closing months of the war, when German night fighter operations effectively ceased. By March 1945, fuel shortages limited German fighters to a handful of sorties per night. Allied bombers flew over Germany with virtual impunity, losses measured in fractions of 1%. Mosquito crews, finding fewer targets, shifted to ground attack missions, strafing German airfields and attacking transportation networks. The transition from hunter to attacker marked the complete collapse of German night defences. Hauptmann Wilhelm Jonen, a night fighter pilot with 34 victories who survived the war, later reflected on what the Mosquito represented to German aircrews. Jonen wrote that the psychological impact exceeded the direct military effect. Knowing that superior British fighters prowled German skies created constant stress that eroded morale and combat effectiveness. Jonen described fellow pilots who developed superstitions, refusing to fly on certain nights or taking elaborate precautions that disrupted tactical discipline. The Mosquito had transformed German night fighter operations from a profession where skill and experience brought reasonable survival prospects into a desperate gamble where death could come at any moment from an enemy you never saw. The technological lessons learned from the Mosquito influenced post-war aviation development significantly. The principle that speed and performance provided better protection than armor and armament became doctrine in fighter design. The integration of radar and airborne interception became standard in night fighters worldwide. The use of non-strategic materials when performance could be maintained influenced designs in nations with limited industrial capacity. Most fundamentally, the Mosquito proved that innovative thinking could overcome apparent material disadvantages, that wooden aircraft built in furniture factories could defeat metal fighters produced in modern industrial facilities. The spring of 1945 brought a peculiar silence to German night fighter bases. Airfields that had once launched dozens of sorties nightly now sat largely inactive, their concrete hardstands occupied by aircraft that lacked fuel to fly. Oberst Hajo Hermann, who had pioneered the wild sow freelance night fighting tactics using single-engine day fighters, walked through the dispersal areas at Parchim Airfield in late March and counted 63 aircraft grounded for lack of aviation gasoline. The few fighters that did fly operated under such strict fuel conservation measures that combat effectiveness was negligible. Pilots were instructed to engage only if absolutely certain of a kill, to avoid extended pursuits, and to land immediately if fuel dropped below minimum reserves. This operational paralysis resulted from the systematic destruction of German synthetic fuel production facilities, a campaign in which Mosquito bombers had played a significant role. The same aircraft that hunted German fighters at night also struck the industrial infrastructure that supported those fighters. The irony was not lost on German commanders who recognized that they faced an opponent capable of operating across multiple domains simultaneously, an opponent whose industrial capacity so exceeded Germany's that the outcome had become inevitable. Wing Commander John Cunningham's final tally of 20 victories, all achieved in Mosquitoes, represented only a fraction of the aircraft's impact. For every German fighter Cunningham destroyed, dozens more were forced to abort missions, waste fuel in evasive maneuvers, or land at alternate airfields due to Mosquito presence. The indirect effects of intruder operations multiplied the direct combat results, creating a degradation of German defensive capability that far exceeded simple loss statistics. The crew coordination required for effective Mosquito operations deserves examination because it reveals why British training systems produced superior results, despite German crews often having more total flying hours. A Mosquito navigator needed to interpret radar returns, provide heading corrections to the pilot, monitor fuel consumption, navigate using multiple systems simultaneously, and maintain radio communications. This workload required months of intensive training and natural aptitude for spatial reasoning. Flight Lieutenant C.M. Miller, a navigator with 8 kills, later described the mental intensity of guiding an attack in total darkness, tracking a maneuvering target while accounting for the Mosquito's own movement, calculating intercept angles in real time, and providing corrections accurate to within a degree or two of heading. German radar operators, by contrast, often received minimal training due to time constraints and fuel shortages. They learned basic operations but rarely developed the intuitive feel for their equipment that came only from extensive practice. This training deficit meant that even when German crews had technical advantages, such as improved radar sets, they often could not exploit those advantages effectively. Skill mattered as much as equipment, perhaps more, and British training systems generated skill that German systems could not match by 1944. The night of January 14, 1945, illustrated how completely the balance had shifted. Squadron Leader Brownsay Burbridge, flying his 148th operational sortie, patrolled over northern Germany with his navigator Flight Sergeant Bill Skelton. They detected a contact at 12 miles range, unusual because most contacts appeared at 3 to 5 miles. Skelton, whose expertise with the AI Mark X radar was exceptional, recognized immediately that the distant contact represented a German fighter turning toward them, probably vectored by ground control. Burbridge turned hard right, diving slightly to break the German radar lock while Skelton maintained contact. The German fighter, A Ju-88G equipped with the latest Fug 220 Liechtenstein SN2 radar searched for the Mosquito, but could not reacquire it. Burbridge reversed his turn, climbed back to altitude, and positioned himself behind the German fighter, which was still searching for the contact it had lost. Skelton guided Burbridge through a series of minor corrections. At 400 yards, Burbridge saw the blue exhaust flames from the Ju-88's engines. At 200 yards, he opened fire. The German aircraft exploded so violently that Burbridge had to dive beneath the debris field. The entire engagement demonstrated technical superiority, tactical expertise, and crew coordination that German night fighters could no longer match. The German crew never knew they had been outthought, outflown, and outfought by opponents operating in the same darkness, but with decisively better tools and training. Oberleutnant Kurt Welter presented a unique case in the final months of the war. Welter flew the Me-262 jet fighter at night, achieving approximately 20 victories against Mosquitos and British bombers. His success came from the jet's exceptional speed, which for the first time gave a German fighter performance parity with the Mosquito. However, Welter's victories, while impressive individually, could not affect the strategic situation. Germany possessed perhaps a dozen Me-262s configured for night fighting, operating sporadically due to fuel shortages and mechanical unreliability. Britain had hundreds of Mosquitos flying nightly. One skilled pilot in an advanced aircraft could achieve local successes but could not reverse a strategic defeat. The human cost accumulated relentlessly. Lieutenant Paul Zorner, who would finish the war with 59 night victories, making him one of the highest-scoring German night fighter pilots, described losing friend after friend to Mosquito attacks. Zorner survived through a combination of skill, luck, and caution, but he watched his unit's strength decline from 18 aircraft in January 1944 to just 4 operational fighters by April 1945. The mathematics were simple and brutal. German losses exceeded replacement rates. British strength grew continuously. Time favoured the side with superior industrial capacity and training systems. The tactical innovations that Mosquito crews developed influenced night fighting doctrine for decades. The concept of barrier patrols, positioning fighters along known enemy routes rather than defending specific targets, became standard in air defence planning. The integration of ground-based intelligence with airborne radar to create layered detection networks shaped how nations organised their air defence systems. The emphasis on speed and altitude as primary defensive characteristics influenced fighter design philosophy well into the jet age. Flight Lieutenant Richard Stevens and his navigator Flying Officer Andrew Milne demonstrated advanced tactical thinking during a patrol over Denmark in February 1945. They detected multiple contacts circling a known night fighter base, apparently waiting for the bomber stream to approach. Rather than engaging immediately, Stevens positioned his Mosquito between the German fighters and the expected bomber route. When German ground control vectored the fighters toward the bomber stream, Stevens waited until they were strung out in loose formation, then attacked the trailing aircraft. He destroyed 2 Bf-110s in rapid succession, causing the remaining German fighters to break formation and return to base. The bomber stream passed through the area unmolested. Stevens had achieved a strategic effect, protecting bombers while suffering no damage and expending minimal ammunition. German technical intelligence reports from early 1945 reveal the depth of understanding that developed about British capabilities. Analysts correctly identified the Mosquito's key advantages, accurately estimated its performance, and recognized that no counter existed within German technological capacity. These reports recommended cessation of night fighter operations to preserve remaining aircraft and crews for other missions. The recommendation was rejected because political leadership demanded continued resistance regardless of military realities. But the recommendation itself demonstrated clear-eyed assessment of an unwinnable situation. The production figures tell their own story of industrial disparity. In 1944, Britain produced 1,271 Mosquitoes across all variants. Germany produced approximately 800 Bf-110s and Me-210s combined. British production used non-strategic materials and labour not required for other aircraft. German production consumed aluminum and skilled workers desperately needed elsewhere. Britain could increase Mosquito production if needed. Germany was already operating at maximum capacity and falling short of requirements. Squadron Leader Raymond Duke Woolley, commanding officer of 456 Squadron, wrote in his memoirs about the transformation in Mosquito operations between 1943 and 1945. In early 1943, patrols over Germany required extreme caution, careful navigation to avoid flak concentrations, and immediate evasion if multiple German fighters appeared. By early 1945, Mosquito crews flew with near impunity, operating in German airspace as confidently as over England. Duke Woolley described flying at 1,500 feet over Berlin in daylight during April 1945, encountering no opposition, seeing German civilians looking up at British aircraft and apparently accepting that resistance was futile. The psychological studies conducted by RAF medical officers on Mosquito crews revealed interesting patterns. Unlike bomber crews who experienced increasing stress with each mission due to cumulative danger, Mosquito crews generally showed decreasing stress over time as their confidence in their aircraft's superiority grew. Pilots with 20 missions were typically more relaxed than pilots with 5 missions because experience proved that the Mosquito could handle any situation they encountered. This psychological resilience contributed to operational effectiveness, allowing veteran crews to maintain peak performance through extended tours. German perspective on this period comes from multiple sources, all conveying similar themes: despair at facing superior equipment, frustration at inadequate fuel and ammunition, anger at leadership that demanded continued sacrifice for no achievable purpose. Oberst Gordon Golob, who commanded various night fighter units, wrote bitter letters to higher command describing how his pilots were being killed by an enemy they could not counter, using tactics they could not defeat, with resources Germany could not match. Golob's letters were filed without action. The war continued. The technical evolution of Mosquito variants continued even as the war entered its final phase. The NF Mark 36, equipped with American AI Mark X radar and British Merlin 113 engines, represented the ultimate development of the basic design. This variant could reach 430 miles per hour, climb to 30,000 feet in 10 minutes, and detect targets at 6 miles range. No German aircraft except experimental jets could match this performance, and those jets existed in numbers too small to matter. The NF Mark 36 entered service in March 1945, demonstrating that British development continued unabated even when victory was assured. Comparison with American and Soviet night fighters reveals British technological leadership in this specialized field. The American P-61 Black Widow, while competent, was slower than the Mosquito and less maneuverable. Soviet night fighters were adaptations of day fighters with minimal specialized equipment. Only the Mosquito combined speed, range, radar performance, and firepower in a package optimized specifically for night fighting. This specialization came from Britain's unique position, facing night bombing threats earlier than other nations and developing countermeasures, while other countries focused on different priorities. The operational records from Mosquito squadrons show remarkable consistency in combat effectiveness across different crews and conditions. Average life expectancy for a Mosquito in combat operations exceeded 200 missions. Average crew survival rate exceeded 90%. These statistics contrasted sharply with bomber crews, where tour completion rates ranged from 30 to 50%, depending on time period and target types. The Mosquito's speed made it the safest combat aircraft in RAF service, another validation of de Havilland's original design philosophy. The strategic bombing campaign's success during late 1944 and early 1945 owed much to Mosquito operations that suppressed German night fighters. With interception rates declining below 5%, bomber formations could attack targets with unprecedented accuracy and minimal losses. Oil production facilities, transportation networks, and industrial centers suffered systematic destruction that paralyzed German war production. The absence of effective air defense allowed this destruction to proceed unimpeded. The Mosquito's contribution to establishing air supremacy was decisive. Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, the highest-scoring night fighter pilot in history with 121 confirmed victories, represented the exceptional skill that still existed within German ranks. Schnaufer achieved his remarkable total through natural ability, extensive experience, and aggressive tactics that put him repeatedly in dangerous positions. Yet, even Schnaufer could not operate effectively by early 1945. His victories came against bombers, not the Mosquito escorts. When he encountered Mosquitoes, he evaded rather than engaging. The best German pilot, flying the best German aircraft, with the best German equipment, still could not compete with average British crews in Mosquitoes. This reality demonstrated that the performance gap had become unbridgeable. The April 14, 1945, mission flown by Flight Lieutenant P.J. Watkins of 604 Squadron symbolized the war's end stage. Watkins patrolled over Hamburg, detected a German fighter attempting to intercept a late-war reconnaissance mission, engaged and destroyed it, then continued his patrol for another hour without encountering any other German aircraft. He returned to England, landed, debriefed, and wrote in his logbook, "Routine patrol, 1 destroyed." The casual notation reflected how completely the situation had changed. What would have been an exceptional combat 2 years earlier was now routine. The VE Day declaration on May 8, 1945, ended Mosquito combat operations over Europe. The final accounting showed that Mosquito night fighters had destroyed approximately 800 German aircraft in air combat, probably destroyed another 200, and damaged hundreds more. These numbers represented direct kills only. The indirect effects, disrupted intercepts, aborted missions, wasted fuel, degraded morale, cannot be quantified precisely but likely exceeded direct effects by factors of 5 or 10. The Mosquito had achieved what it was designed to do: establish British air superiority at night. The post-war analysis conducted by both British and German air forces reached similar conclusions. The Mosquito represented optimal application of available technology to a specific problem. Its wooden construction, initially viewed as a weakness, proved to be an advantage that allowed mass production without consuming strategic materials. Its speed, achieved through powerful engines and efficient design, provided protection superior to armor. Its radar integration gave it capability that human senses alone could never match. Most critically, its design philosophy, prioritizing performance over defensive armament, proved correct in practice. German general officers studying the Mosquito after the war expressed admiration mixed with frustration. Admiration for the engineering excellence that produced such a capable aircraft. Frustration that German industry and design philosophy had not pursued similar approaches. General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, who commanded German air defense forces, wrote that the Mosquito represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking that Germany needed but failed to cultivate. German designers improved existing aircraft incrementally. British designers reimagined what aircraft could be. The legacy extended beyond military aviation. The Mosquito proved that unconventional materials and construction methods could produce world-class performance. This lesson influenced post-war aircraft design, particularly in nations seeking to build capable aircraft without access to advanced materials. The emphasis on speed and performance shaped fighter development for decades. The integration of electronics and weapons systems established patterns that continue in modern combat aircraft. For the men who flew the Mosquito, the aircraft represented more than technical specifications and combat statistics. It represented confidence born from knowing they flew the best night fighter in the world. It represented security derived from speed that could extract them from any situation. It represented pride in British engineering and industrial capability. Squadron Leader John Cunningham, interviewed in the 1980s, spoke about the Mosquito with obvious affection, describing it as an aircraft that did everything right, that inspired trust, that made difficult missions seem manageable. For German night fighter crews who survived the war, the Mosquito represented a turning point where the balance shifted irreversibly. They had entered the war with technical superiority, lost that superiority gradually through 1942 and 43, then faced absolute inferiority by 1944. The psychological impact of this reversal, of being hunted rather than hunting, of fleeing rather than attacking, shaped how they remembered the war. The Mosquito became symbolic of German defeat, a wooden aircraft built by a nation with smaller industrial capacity, defeating metal fighters produced by what had been Europe's most advanced industrial power. The final irony lay in simplicity, defeating complexity. The Mosquito was not a complicated aircraft. It used conventional engines, straightforward controls, proven construction techniques adapted from furniture making. It succeeded through elegant integration of existing technologies rather than revolutionary innovations. Germany pursued complexity, developing jet engines, rocket aircraft, and advanced electronics. These technologies promised superiority but arrived too late, in too few numbers, with too many technical problems. Britain built thousands of wooden aircraft using established methods and won the Night Air War decisively. The morning after the war ended, Mosquito squadrons stood down from combat operations, their crews celebrating survival and victory. The aircraft that had dominated European night skies would continue serving for years in various roles, but the urgent need that drove their combat employment had passed. In dispersal areas across England, ground crews painted victory markings on Mosquito fuselages, small symbols representing German aircraft destroyed. The cumulative totals told a story of technical superiority, tactical excellence, and industrial dominance. They told the story of how a wooden aircraft, designed by a visionary engineer, became the weapon that made German night fighters irrelevant and British bombers unstoppable. The strategic bombing campaign that destroyed German industry, the air superiority that enabled Allied armies to advance across Europe, the defeat of the Luftwaffe that left German skies defenseless, all these outcomes involved multiple factors and forces. But among those factors, the Mosquito's contribution was significant and lasting. It represented British determination to fight intelligently rather than simply matching German force with greater force. It demonstrated that innovation could overcome material disadvantages, that speed could substitute for armor, that wooden aircraft built in furniture factories could defeat metal fighters produced in modern facilities. The Germans never expected this. They anticipated conventional responses to conventional problems. They did not expect a plywood bomber to become a 400-mile-per-hour hunter that stalked their night fighters with impunity. They did not expect Merlin engines to provide such decisive performance advantages. They did not expect British industry to produce such aircraft in numbers that saturated German defences. Most fundamentally, they did not expect to lose the technological race they believed they dominated. But they did lose, and the Mosquito was among the weapons that ensured that loss. Its legacy persisted through decades of aviation development, through doctrinal changes in air combat, through the memories of men who flew it and men who faced it. The wooden wonder, the fastest operational aircraft of its era, the night fighter that hunted the hunters and broke the German defensive system, the aircraft Germany never expected and could not counter. The Mosquito. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.